Okay, we might get started now. Look, I just want to welcome those who have come in on the session. And yes, you're here for the right session. This is a grad chat session on GSA's electoral regulations. And I'm joined by a couple of councillors to be able to provide their expertise in sort of setting the scene of what's happening in the electoral regulations space. But before I kick off, my name is Timmy Lasuma. I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, especially as we Parkville campus-based organisation. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and recognise the strength, resilience, and capacity of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders in this land. So yeah, as I said before, my name is Timmy Lasuma. I'm GM for Student Engagement. I'm very happy to be here on this session to talk to you about the upcoming changes or discussions around GSA's electoral regulations. As you hopefully you do know, last year we were able to pass our new constitution, which essentially gives more voices to the graduate cohort in shaping the future of their experience and the experience of other graduates through their university life at UniMelb. So before I kick off, I'd like to introduce our guests on the panel today, and I'll just go through the order that they are in front of me. I have Jeremy Wade, who is the GSA president, and he's here, and he's a Juris Doctor student, and has been our president since last year, June 2020. Prior to this, he was involved with the initial consultation around drafting of GSA's revised constitution, which I mentioned, and the governance model. He has a strong interest in governance, with an aim to ensure GSA can effectively represent and advocate for graduates into the future. So welcome to Jeremy there. Also with us is our General Secretary of GSA, Lillian Day. So Lily is a student in the Master of Social Policy. She was elected as Gen Sec for GSA last year, and she's chaired a working group to help in completing the electoral regs with a fantastic team. So we're very lucky to have Lillian here also as an expert in the room. And finally, we have Matthew Harper-Gong, who's our Activities Officer at GSA. Matt is in a second year. He's a second-year JD student at law school, and is the current Activities Officer on Council. He is also a member of GSA's Electoral Regulations Working Group, and over the past year, he's spent a lot of time reading through these regulations. So no pressure on you, Matt. We're going to rely on some feedback later in the session. So before I kick off some general questions around the reasons or some of the details around our GSA regulations for the electoral part of our elections, I want to just set the scene around why we're here. So GSA is a strong organization that relies on student feedback, interaction, and consultation on designing the organization and how we interact and support students. So this is no different. This session is put together to be able to provide information, generic information around our electoral regulations, receive some questions if we have any questions from the group that are with us today, but also use it as a resource. And it's one of two sessions that we've put together. So we have today, Thursday, 21st of Jan, and then next week on the 28th, we'll be doing a similar session around lunchtime. So for those who miss out on this session, the recording will be available, and also we'll link you in with an email address at the end if you've got some specific questions you want to ask our General Secretary, Lillian. So I think I might kick off here. So I've got a question there for you, Jeremy. I understand GSA adopted a new constitution in June last year, and a few additional amendments were included also in November. Could you explain to the GSA members the key changes and the focus more on those changes around the governance structure for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Davida. So currently under the current model, so we haven't moved to this new constitution yet. We're still under the old one. So currently we have 15 elected students who are responsible from everything from governance to reading financial reports to doing representation to representing their faculties. So we have the one body, I guess, trying to juggle a lot of different things at once. It also means that because we're elected directly to the council, it means if there are certain groups that aren't represented through that election, there won't be much representation for those groups. For example, if no LGBTQI+ students are elected to council, we'll be able to have an officer for that portfolio. So this new model, I think, is going to improve that representation by separating out these functions that the council is doing. So the first one will be the establishment of a representative council. So that means that these types of positions will be directly elected by their constituencies, meaning that no matter what, we are going to have representation for these groups. Another major change is the faculty council. So we're going to have guaranteed representation for each faculty, but circling back to the point on governance, so the better governance through all this is that we are still going to maintain strengthened and student-led governance. However, we're going to have a group solely dedicated to governance. So a group of 8 elected students who are focusing on the governance side of things while allowing the representative council to solely focus on representation. And just briefly, I'll mention the changes from November 2020. So that was mostly a lot of, I guess, tidying up the work that we'd done in the previous year, fixing some of the references to various sections and things. One notable change, however, was that we gave the GSA board the ability to determine what are called restricted constituencies, so allowing direct election from certain constituencies. I believe we'll discuss that a bit further down in this chat, but I'll just I guess to summarize, we've increased the number of student representatives we're going to have, and we've created more specific roles for student representatives to hopefully improve the way GSA can represent students overall.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jeremy. I think that's one of the key points of the change, and looking forward to when we have it implemented at the AGM, is that currently councillors wear 2 hats. You've got your governance hat and your representative hat, and it's sometimes really hard to juggle both. And I think this new constitution allows full focus on either areas of GSA. So yeah, looking forward to that. Thanks so much, Jeremy. Lily, I might jump over to you if that's all right. Can you briefly explain the importance of the electoral regulations document and what process has been used to date to develop the draft ones that we see?
Yeah, so the electoral regulations have been put together to ensure that the elections we run are fair and equitable to GSA's members, as well as the candidates who are running and GSA itself. Because the structure of GSA's council is changing, like Jeremy was just describing, from the next election, it's really important that the regulations are also updated appropriately. So they're here to work in line with our constitution and make sure that we're following all the rules that we have to ensure that GSA is run as best as possible. So this draft has been developed with input from various different people, including a really amazing working group that included both GSA members more generally, and then also our board members. Then it was put together by lawyers, and it's now in the final stages where we're seeking some feedback and input from our members before we finally send it off to the tribunal for approval.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And so a lot of work's gone into just to get to this point, and I think it's pertinent to say that the electoral regulations are available online to look at and peruse. And also the information around the different positions. I think we have a blog post that's up on our site for those who'd like to see some of the things that Jeremy was talking about in terms of those representative council members. Okay, so I'm going to throw over to our activities officer, Matt. Look, Matt, we understand the 2021 general elections for GSA will be held in May this year. Can you provide a bit of overview of who appoints the returning officer and what's their role?
Thanks, Davida. So the returning officer is basically the person responsible for running the entire election process. So everything from accepting nominations to being the first point of call for allegations of rule breaches and things like that, as well as generally deciding the conduct of the election within the scope of the regulations. So the returning officer is generally appointed to somebody external to the GSA so as to avoid any conflicts of interest, and they have to follow and interpret the electoral regulations. But if you disagree with one of their interpretations, for example, about an allegation, if a candidate has breached one of the regulations, then you can appeal that decision to a tribunal, which is a process we'll get to in a bit. But basically the most important thing to know is that the returning officer, who will be announced closer to the election, is the first point of call for all matters relating to the election.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. I think one of those key points there that Matt pointed out is that they are independent of GSA, and I think it's nice to keep it completely separate so that that person becomes the expert on the regs. And then, obviously, as Matt said, if there's a further issue, there's another step that they can go to allow for any of those questionable actions that sometimes come out during elections, and it's just part of the process. So look, I might flip it back to Jeremy if I can. Jeremy, can you provide an overview of the election rules for the GSA board?
Yeah, sure, of course. So the board operates a little bit different to the Representative Council. So if you voted in the GSA election before, you're probably very familiar with how the board is going to operate. So essentially there are going to be 8 elected members of the board, and it's a preferential style of voting. And you're voting for just general board members. You'll see that there are also 4 positions called board officials. So these aren't directly elected. They're what's called a reps elect system. So what this means is that the board itself needs to have confidence in these representatives to, I guess, lead the board, given that they are kind of board leadership positions. So they will then vote on who will be the president, general secretary, treasurer, and vice president. So that's the way that the board is a bit different to the other bodies that we're going to be having.
Fantastic, thank you. I think you might have mentioned there, but how many do we have on the board?
Yes, we have 8 members on the board.
Fantastic. I just want to clarify. So 8 members on the board. Thank you. And now I might just jump over to Lily. Can you provide an overview of the election rules for the Representative Council?
Yeah, so the Representative Council will consist of somewhere between 8 and 15 councillors. This exact number and the positions within it will be decided by the board at the appropriate time. And like Tavita was saying earlier, we do have some of these proposed positions up on our blog and our website at the moment, if you would like to look through those. Any GSA member can run to be a part of this council, but importantly, you can't be both a board and a representative council member. So it will also use preferential voting, where you'll place the number next to the candidate's name, where 1 is your first preference, but you don't need to allocate a preference for every single person. The Representative Council votes will be counted after the board votes and before the Faculty Council votes to make sure that no one has 2 of those positions. Fantastic.
Thanks, Lily. I think it sort of just rings true to what we discussed earlier about, you can't be a board member and a representative council member because of those hats that you inherently need to wear. And I think that's, again, I'll say, exciting part about this change is that focus for whoever wants to be in those roles. So thank you. Matt, can I ask you a question here? Can you provide an overview of the faculty council members or how they will be elected per the electoral regs?
Yeah, sure. So the Faculty Council is the last of those 3 new bodies that will make up the GSA after the next election. And so the Faculty Council will have 2 members from each university faculty. And according to the regulations, one of those members has to be an international student and the other a coursework student. And pretty self-explanatory, you have to be a student in that faculty to stand for that faculty's Faculty Council position. Yeah, that's essentially it for the Faculty Council, I think.
Fantastic. And is it similar? Is it preferential voting? Sorry, is it the same style from the Representative Council?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, amazing. So I guess this is also another. I mean, I've been at GSA for a little while now, and I've just seen some transitions. But having 2 dedicated students within a faculty to represent them, their cohort, and also connect GSA to better connect GSA to faculty is another opportunity for GSA to be doing more and to be able to represent more. So yeah, thank you, Matt. Jeremy, I'm going to jump back onto you now. Can you please provide us a simple explanation of the term restricted constituencies? Can you provide an example and maybe explain that term a bit clearly for us?
Yeah, sure. So it is a term that I've thrown around a couple of times. So it's good to, I guess, explain it a bit more clearly. So as we know, constituency, the term itself just refers to a group of eligible voters. So for example, the constituency of GSA is all graduate students at the University of Melbourne. So when we say restricted constituency, we're essentially taking that a step further and taking a group within the broader constituency. And it's always best to explain this with an example because it doesn't make much sense at this point. I understand that. So for example, one good example of this would be an officer like the women's officer. So if we were to make this a restricted constituency position, this would mean that all graduate students who identify as women will be able to vote for the women's officer. However, those that don't won't be able to vote. So that's what we mean by the constituency being restricted. This is to ensure that, for example, in this example, the women's officer, that they are representative of cohort, and they can say in the cohort themselves, the restricted constituency themselves has complete say over who will represent them. So I hope that helps explain it, but essentially restricting the pool of voters based on what that position is aiming to represent.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Jeremy. I think it's also, a very important point is that it's the people who would be represented by that officer have the choice to decide who that is. And I think that's a key part of that. So thank you. All right, so Lily, back to you now. So the information in relation to the election material and candidates forum is very important. Could you provide an overview of the rules and why they're so important?
Yeah, this section is important so that we can make the election process fair and equitable for everyone. So it focuses on how candidates can promote themselves, including, sending in a photo and a 200-word statement that they can submit to the returning officer, so that can be published on the GSA website for voters to see. There can also be a forum where candidates are asked questions and can make a 3-minute speech. Importantly, some types of publicity are not allowed. So these are things that might, give you kind of that extra advantage, such as paid advertisements in newspaper, radio, TV, internet, anything that was like a really, really big banner, really expensive looking leaflets and posters, those kinds of things. And on top of that, any of the promotional material like leaflets, posters, banners, potentially even social media posts will need to be authorised and registered by the returning officer to make sure that it's in line with these standards that we've set. And this is all just to make sure that no one is unfairly advantaged by being able to promote themselves more than others.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Olivia. It's definitely, as one of your first sentences, about making it fair and equitable to all students, no matter what situation you're in. And I think it also links back to what I think Matt was talking about, the returning officer. So it being independent, they're allowed to, one, be the expert of the electoral regs, but also be that point of call to make a judgment on those types of potential issues that could arise. So yeah, fantastic. I think linked to that returning officer and potential breaches, I wanted to jump over to Matt now. And can you provide an overview of the role of the tribunal and why they're so important?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Davida. So the Electoral Tribunal sits above the returning officer and is basically the final court of appeal for most election matters. And as I mentioned earlier, if you disagree with the decision of the returning officer, then you can appeal that to the tribunal to have that decision overturned if they find that it was inconsistent with the regulations, or they might also uphold the decision, of course. So the important things that you need to know about the tribunal is that it's elected under the GSA Constitution and is composed of people external to GSA, like the returning officer, so that it can be independent and not have any conflicts of interest. And that you can appeal the decision of the returning officer by contacting the chair of the tribunal. and there'll be more info about that closer to the election. They also hear reports of prohibited conduct, and lastly, they also hear appeals against the results of the election. So if once the election results are released and you think there's been a defect in the conduct of the election that has materially affected the results, then you can appeal that to the tribunal, which may then order a new election.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. I think, and also just to add on to that part is, I understood that the tribunal also has the final sort of approval on the results as well as they come through. Whether there's been an appeal or no appeal, they basically hold the final approval. So it's good to know that there's these independent lines of, I guess, levels of authority to make sure that we do conduct ourselves in a fair and equitable way for this process, because the end result is that we want to give as many opportunities as we can to those interested. Okay, so actually I've got something up that's here for me to sort of explain. So for those who don't know and haven't been through an election for GSA before, we've talked about a lot of the players previously. So one key player is the returning officer, as Matt mentioned before, and they basically help us set the scene. So because they are the expert in the regs, they advise around our timings of when we need to talk to our members around when the election is, how people can nominate, and also provide those sessions on so what's involved. So generally, with the support of the independent returning officer, we normally promote a session like this, and most likely like this, where we explain the roles of the board or the representative council or the faculty council to the general students, if any interest is there, and so we can talk about what's involved. Then we would generally ask for nominations, so there's a nomination period after that. And we're still running sessions to the general public, members around what is the roles of the students in these particular councils or boards. And then from there, as they submit their nominations, they're checked by the returning officer to ensure that they are a currently enrolled student at the University of Melbourne, and that they've basically, that's been approved. And from there, when nominations have closed and been confirmed, we welcome with the returning officer these candidates. They become candidates then to be able to address the GSA members as a whole about why they feel that they should be part of that particular area they're going for. And so we have an opportunity for those guys and those statements, and sometimes they're video and sometimes they're on a website, and the format comes later on. And then we start with the election period. And I say the election period, I think it's been around 2 weeks in the past, and it's essentially a time where anyone who's involved in the election process, so sometimes there are candidates that are currently involved in GSA, they actually stop what they're doing to ensure that they're completely impartial to any other conflicts that could arise as being part of GSA. So the election process is run. It is online. We've been online for our elections for a few years now and found it quite robust in the way that the results come through. So we most likely, and we take advice from the returning officer in that regard. And then so it goes through the university, allows us to reach out to the members to get involved in voting. And as voting closes, it's the returning officer that ensures that all the votes have been tallied and counted correctly, and then suggests the results. There is always preliminary results that are put forward before they are actually approved and approved by the tribunal. So until then, that's when I guess the whole election process comes together. There's going to be slight differences this year because of the new setup with our 3 different groups of students. But essentially, as an overview, that's generally how it's going to be run. And then what normally takes place after that is at the AGM is the official time when the new students or continuing students take their positions for GSA. So this is just a general overview. I'm sure there's a little bit more details to add as part of that overview, and also for us, GSA, it speculates in the electoral regs when we have to start letting the constituents know when these important dates arise. So please look out for all our channels. If you're not on them now, please register through the website or get in touch with us to make sure you're informed about when these things happen. We're very active on socials when it's election time. So yeah, please be aware. So look, enough from me. I might jump on to Jeremy now. And this is a nice linkage here. Is when will the next election be held, and when does the process of nominations start?
Yes, so most of this process starts happening pretty much over the course of this semester that we've got coming up. So there are some guidelines around these dates, as Davida was saying, in the electoral regulations. But typically speaking, you can expect the nominations for election to open in early March. And they're usually open for a little while, maybe a couple to a few weeks. And then the election will take place a little while after that. So yeah, elections will usually run for a couple of weeks. And the key kind of defining factor within the regulations is the benchmark is the GSA annual general meeting, which takes place, has to take place within the last 4 weeks of the semester. So by that point, the electoral results need to be finalized, so you can expect the returning officer to make decisions on those to make sure that happens. So definitely expect it to start, I guess, happening within the next couple of months. And as Tavita said, it'll all be advertised if you're subscribed to our channels and our email list and things like that.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeremy. And I might ask maybe now, Lily, I understand the council is adopting the electoral regs at the next council meeting, which is on the 29th of January. Thank you. How can members provide feedback, and when do they need to do this by?
Yeah, so any feedback or questions or anything like that can be sent to my email address, which is gensec@gsa.unimel.edu.au. That is also on the website. And we're asking for feedback to be sent by the 28th of January so that we can approve it at the board meeting on the 29th. In saying that though, after this deadline has passed, I'm still really happy to discuss the document and answer any questions you might have about it as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lee. I think that rings true to why we hold sessions like this, is for the consultation, because essentially the three of you in the room will graduate soon or in the near future, and I think it's important that you set up these platforms to allow future generations of students or postgrads that want to support their fellow students at University of Melbourne. So hence why we're recording this session, to be able to allow others to listen in at their leisure. Timings don't always work for everyone, but we want to make sure that we let you know that we want to hear from you. So just to reiterate, we've got gensec@gsa.unimel.edu.au, and that's Lily. And as a gensec, she needs to be aware of any feedback that comes across the electoral regs. And linked to that is any feedback in relation to the office bearer positions that are part of the Representative Council. So please be on the lookout for that. So did any of you in the room want to add anything else as we look to close out the session? Was there any little bits and tips and bits that you wanted to add in relation to the Constitution or electoral regs? This is probably a good time. I know that students generally like emailing their questions through because they can be such large questions, and I think it's nice that we can facilitate something written back to them to make sure that they fully understand the response. But I just wanted to put it out as a final sort of request to anyone in the space here if you wanted to add anything. Lily, did you want to add anything as GenSec?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you so much to everyone who was involved in putting this together in the first place. It's taken a lot of work and a lot of time and energy. So I'm really, really grateful to everyone who has put into that. I also want to say that we are really encouraging feedback. I think, we want to make this as open as we possibly can. We're running this session because we want to keep our grad students as involved as possible. So my door is always open for talking about this, talking about other kinds of things, constitutional questions, all of that. We really welcome that. So thank you for listening in. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Lou. Matt, I might jump over to you. Do you have anything to add from your space in this world that is Constitution and electoral regs?
No, not a whole lot. I guess I'd just echo what Lily said and really encourage people to have a read of the regulations if they have time, even if you're not thinking of running, as long as you have an interest in improving the GSA. Have a look at it and yeah, send us your feedback.
Right, thanks, Matt. I think that's a good thing to echo also based on Matt says that even if you're not interested in running for elections, it's really important you understand and potentially get some feedback on this structure that will support GSA moving forward and its members. So as a postgrad, look, you are a member. So essentially an organization, a membership organization is nothing without the members. So Jeremy, did you want to add any closing remarks there to the session?
Yeah, sure. I think it's for a lot of us at GSA, it's quite exciting that, you know, this is one of the final steps, I guess, in reforming how we represent graduate students. It's been quite a long process. I think it's very exciting that we're kind of finally at this point. Of course, this is quite a big thing we're embarking on at GSA. As Lily said, you know, even after, you know, we finished this consultation process, of course, please reach out to us still if you've got any other feedback or concerns or need clarification on anything. And of course, you know, these regulations can change in the future if they really need to, after we go through this process and we're like, you know, there are things we can tweak here, there are things we can alter. So yeah, regardless, you know, if you have any other ideas for how we can better improve our electoral systems at GSA, there's no such thing as too late. So always get in touch. But I think the overall sentiment is, yeah, we're all quite fortunate to be at this point here now. So yeah, thanks, Davida.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And I think that's a great point also there is that, you know, the members actually vote on changing anything to do with Constitution or electoral regs. So, you know, whether it's now or whether it's just down the track, is that actually I felt that this could have been done a little bit differently. Consultation is the forefront of any decision that's made through GSA. So in that vein, we're going to now close the session. This is a recorded session. It will be made available through our channels being Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube for those who follow YouTube. Our website usually hosts all the information in relation to our Constitution and electoral regs. Please go to the representation area. And also, as Lily mentioned before, in our blog session, there is a memo there from Jeremy, our president, to talk about some of the proposed changes to these representative positions. So please take the advice, get involved, follow us, and hopefully see you as either a nominee, a candidate, or even just a postgraduate student at the University of Melbourne. So on that note, thank you so much for everyone's time today. Reach out to us, take care, and stay safe. Goodbye.